Hello, welcome back to the Boardgames4K YouTube channel, and this is a channel where we give you reviews, playthroughs, unboxings, and we generally like to talk a load of bollocks about tabletop gaming in general. And in this video we're going to be talking about a hybrid game that was released quite a while ago. We're going to be talking about Lewis and Clark, The Expedition. And this is a game which sees you play cards from your hand, place a few workers out to the board in an attempt to move your camp through the American wilderness and to get to the final destination first or as quickly as possible. So in this video we're going to be giving you a very brief overview of the rules. We'll be telling you what we do like, what we don't like. Then we'll come back. We'll tell you whether or not Lewis and Clark is still worth playing today and in the future. Maybe because it's got a second edition, it's just been released. So remember, if you're new here, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a comment in that section down below, and we will see you after this.
Boardgames4K.
So, Lewis and Clark, how'd you play this game? So first things first, right, we are talking about the first edition. I think it's the second printing. Maybe it's the first printing. It's the first edition anyway. We're not talking about second edition. We haven't seen the second edition. So maybe there's been a few rules changes. I ain't got a clue. So if you want to know about the second edition, then go and watch another bloody video. So Lewis and Clark is a bit of a hybrid game. It's got a bit of everything. It's got a bit of racing, a bit of deck building, it's got a bit of worker placement, a bit of card management, all that sort of stuff, right? So once you set the game up, you've got a choice of doing two things on your turn. You've got a mandatory thing that you've got to do. You've got to perform an action. You're no getting away from that. You can't hide in the fridge or anything. You're going to have to do an action. The second option you've got is that you've got the option of setting up camp, and or you've got the option of buying a character from one of them characters that's on the display. So the actions you can take a character action, in which case you'll select one of the cards from your starting hand and you'll play it and you'll do what it says, or you can use some Indians that you've acquired and place them on a relevant spot on a game board, like a sort of a worker placement thing, a bit like Stone Age, you know. So if you select a character card from your hand, you'll play the card face up, and you'll notice that there's certain Indian markers on one side of the board, and this indicates to you that the card has to be activated, right? So there's three ways of activating a card. You can select another card from your hand, you'll flip it over and you'll place it underneath the card, right? And that will give you at least one Indian to activate a card. You can take a card from your hand, flip it over and place some extra Indians on the empty spots on the card, or you can just load the card up itself with some Indian meeples, and then that will activate the card without having to flip one over, right? So everybody starts with the same cards, right? You're going to be acquiring more cards by buying them from the display on the board, but we're going to talk about the starting cards very, very briefly. We're not going to spend eons talking about this. In fact, I'm wasting enough time as is, so shut up. So the first cards that you could talk about are the primary resource collection cards that you've got. You're going to play the card, and then you're going to look at who's got what next to you. For every symbol that matches the card you played, you're going to take that many resources and put it on your player board. And you've got to be careful with this because you've only got a certain amount of slots that you can put resources onto. If you get to the end of the round with too many resources, this is going to cost you a lot of time. You've got to be very mindful of that, but we'll get into that in a little bit, right? So the next action you can take is you can take the action that lets you take Indians from the board, right? And what you'll do, any Indians that are already on the board, you'll move them into the centre of the board called the powwow area, and then you'll get the option of taking as many of them as you want and placing them on your relevant spot on your player board, yeah? Then you'll discard the character card that's at the bottom of the display, and then finally place an Indian meeple on the newcomer area of the board, right? And this is the primary way of getting your Indians meeples onto your player board that will allow you to take subsequent actions on later turns, you know? So the next action you can do from your starting hand is the commander action, which allows you to move forward on the route. You'll have to pay a certain number of resources that will allow you to move on land or through the mountains. If you notice on the board, you've got a sort of a mountain segment that's always a pain in the backside to move through. And then you'll move your scout that number of spaces up the river. You won't move a camp yet, you'll do that later, but you'll move your scout marker that many spaces up the river or through the mountains or whatever you want to do, right? Those are the basic starting card actions, and now we're going to turn our attention to the actions on the board, right? And for this, you're going to need to pick up some Indian meeples and chuck them onto the board, and this will allow you to take actions. So you've got the basic actions that's going to allow you to take food or different types of resources like fur, wood, equipment, and all that sort of thing, or food. You've got the farewell space that will allow you to discard 0 to 3 character cards from your hand, a way of dumping out all the shite that you got in your hand. And then you'll be able to discard all the cards in the journal, which is the display, and then you'll be able to refill them up. Right. You've got the horse trade action where you'll be able to discard 3 different resources, and then you'll be able to take a horse cube. You've got the same principle when you're talking about the canoe manufacturing. You'll discard those resources and you'll take a canoe cube. Got the expedition upgrade. You'll pay 3 wood and then you'll be able to take one of the upgrade tiles and add it to your player board. This will basically expand your ability to carry more gear. Then you've got the shamanism action. You'll be able to activate a character card that's already on the table. So that's all the actions you can take on the player board. Now we're going to quickly talk about the other 2 optional things that you can do. Basically, you can recruit a character from the display. You'll pay the cost in equipment, and there'll also be a cost of maybe furs or something, so you have to pay the cost. And then what you'll do, you'll add that character to your hand and then you slide everything down and reveal a new card. So the final thing that you can do in this game is you can take the encampment action, right? So when you set up camp, you'll place all the Indians that you played on your cards back into the boats on your player board. Then you'll calculate how much time you've spent about. Time is the equal sum of the character cards that are still in your hand at this moment. So it'll be 1 time for every character card in your hand, and then the possible time costs of the boats in your expedition, right? So the first space is free. The second space will cost you 1 time no matter what. The third space will cost you 1 time for every space that is taken up. And then the last one will be 1 time per Indian, right? So what you do, you move your scout backwards by the same number of spaces as the time your expedition spends as in camp. And then what you do, you'll bring your camp up to the space where your scout finished, right? So you keep doing this, you'll keep going backwards and forwards across the map. And the first player to bring their camp marker up to Fort Clatsop, I think that's how you pronounce it, will be the winner of Lewis and Clark. So what do we like about Lewis and Clark? So the first thing that we really, really like about Lewis and Clark is the fact that this game utilises dual-use cards in a really, really novel way. Not only can you use the abilities of the characters as you see fit, as you first see them, but you can flip them over to power up other cards. And I haven't really seen this much in many games. When this was released way back in the day, I can't remember, 2012, something like that. Didn't really see this very much. It was a really novel way of doing something. So you've got to be thinking, am I going to keep the cards in my hand to actually sort of get the resources I need? Because more often than not, you're going to be using the lower powered cards like the dog and the one that gives you wood and that to power up the cards. But then there might be occasions when you might want to use some of the extra cards that you got from the display to give you that little bit more power when you're trying to augment the really decent cards, So it's a really nice choice between which way you're going to go with respect to utilising the abilities of the cards, you know what I mean? So the second thing that we really like about Lewis and Clark is that this game effectively utilises a mishmash of other genres. You've got deck building in there, haven't you? Because you'll be taking cards from the display, adding them into your hand, playing them, and then scooping them all back up again. You've got the racing element, where it's going to be the first player to set up camp in Fort Clatsop, Clacksack. You've got the worker placement element, where you'll be placing the Indian meeples onto the board a la Stone Age. And then also you've got that hand management as well, which we just talked about in our previous point. So the fact that this game amalgamates all probably the most popular genres or mechanics of previous games and really effectively meshes them into a really coherent package. Super. So the next thing that we really like about Lewis and Clark is it's really intriguing the way this game tempts you into loading up your player board with all the junk possible, only to turn round to you at the end of your turn and say, hang on a minute, mate, I think you're carrying too much there. You need to offload some of that junk, right? So in order to win this game, you're going to be forced into a position to carry as much stuff as possible. But in order to move forward, you're going to have to be as light as possible, right? So the game operates around this sort of balance of how much are you willing to risk carrying up against how quickly do you feel you can move through the wilderness, right? And that is that's fantastic, that is. So the final thing that we really like about Lewis and Clark is this game looks absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful sight to behold on the table. You've got the rich colours of the actual map. It looks absolutely fantastic, and the detailed artwork on the character cards really brings this game alive. And one of the other amazing things about this game, whilst everyone starts with the same type of cards, each player's got different characters on the same cards that they've got, right? So there's this wild variety of characters that are anchored in history, and you've even got this sort of bibliography sort of thing at the back of the rule book that tells you a little bit of stuff around all the characters, and that's really lovely. We do like that about games when they go the extra mile to anchor the theme down in your head. So what don't we like about Lewis and Clark? So the first thing that we don't like about Lewis and Clark is that when you grab all the Indians from the centre of the board, there's not really any sort of incentive not to grab those Indians, because more often than not, you are going to be using them all up, and they're not going to be hanging about on your board, are they? You know what I mean? So 99% of the time, if it's your turn and you've got the opportunity to grab all them Indians that are in the centre of the board, you're going to do it, you? And that means that everybody else is going to basically have no way of performing those worker placement actions. Okay, this ain't too bad in like maybe a 3-player game, but when you're talking like a 5-player game, there's going to be occasions where everybody but one player isn't really going to be able to do much more than half the game, right? It might be the case that when that opportunity comes around again to grab those Indian meeples from the centre of the board, you're going to miss out because you didn't have the right card or you'd already done something with it. And so you might have to sit out. And if you miss this once or twice or 3 times, you are stuffed, right? So it just seems a little bit unbalanced. If you've got the opportunity to take those Indian meeples, you're going to gobble them up, aren't you? So the next thing we don't like about Lewis and Clark is that whilst it's part of the main game, moving your scout marker loads and loads of spaces forward because you played a good round, only to see it move back X amount of spaces, it can be a little bit frustrating. It's like a tug of war mechanism. This is especially even more frustrating when you've built up the means to move through the mountains only to find that you have miscalculated and you have to go back. So there's this frustrating element to it where you feel like you're progressing, but really you're not. You're actually sort of taking a step back every time, you know. So the final thing that we don't like about Lewis and Clark is that we found that the equipment, the grey cubes, you need these to be able to buy characters, right? They're a fundamental part of that process, but they're in such short supply that it makes the purchasing of these characters insanely difficult. And again, it's exacerbated in higher player games when you're talking like 5 players and that. You are going to be banging your head against a brick wall, and there have been occasions where somebody has actually threatened to kill me because I've gone to the equipment space twice in a row and they've not been able to get any right. I know this game shouldn't incite people to murder, but it does. So to summarise, is Lewis and Clark still worth playing? Maybe buying a 2nd edition today and maybe next Tuesday? So we're going to say yes, this is a captivating and engaging visual feast that attempts to capture the spirit of multiple genres in board games and pulls it off with spectacular ease. It can be frustrating watching your scout marker move forward and your camp marker never quite catching up to it, simply because you didn't get an opportunity to grab those Indian meeples, or maybe you missed out on a card because you couldn't get on the equipment space. But at the end of the day, this is a game that rewards your ability to see balance, and the frustration that emerges from this game is usually born out of a misguided desire to move forward too quickly or to carry too much clobber when you ain't got the means to do so. So we are going to give Lewis and Clark 4 out of 5. Like I said, this version we've got is out of print, but it's just been reprinted in a 2nd edition. I'm led to believe there's not been that many rule changes. There might be a couple of little nuances that have been added or taken away. If you know what they are, then leave a comment down in that section there. It's an intriguing game. It's a beautiful looking game, and we like this one a lot. So there you go, that's Lewis and Clark. Remember, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a comment in that section down below, and we'll see you next time.